I am not a finance guy today, but I'm a recovering finance guy. So my background real quick, first off, Greg Baugh, GSB Search is my own executive search firm that I've had since 2010. I've been in the staffing industry since 1994. But before that, yes, I did start at Ernst & Winnie. Yes, that dates me. And I started in tax. As I tell people, I did my penance in accounting for 5 years, and then they kicked me out, told me to go be a recruiter. So that's what I've been. So here's what I'm going to start off with, is that basically, we've had a global pandemic that has just brought a dramatic shift in almost every business out there. And obviously the current events right now is we're seeing inflation, supply chain, things that are all ramifications of what's come from all of that. And then when you go look back at what happened in 2020, in the spring of 2020, the impact on employment was dramatic. It affected some industries more than others. Service and travel, entertainment businesses were affected much greater from an employment fluctuation standpoint because they had massive layoffs and furloughs, whereas manufacturing that was deemed critical, financial services and technology companies, they basically just had to shift the way they worked. And to a large degree, nothing really changed and they were finding ways to get work done. But if you were the local hairdresser or you're the local restaurant that couldn't have people in seat dining, it was massively impactful in 2020. And so many of the industries that did not face the massive layoffs, I think it's pretty well documented that between government support and the fact that many organizations, and this is a little bit of my opinion in theory and talking to CFOs and talking to CEOs, they went through a period of right before the pandemic from about 2014 to 2000, well, really kind of started about later in the teens, 2015 through 2019, they were struggling to find that A caliber talent. I work a lot in the finance and accounting space, and my philosophy is that they knew that their perception was just like what you said, Mark, earlier, is that, well, we'll get through this, we'll get over this, and we'll get back to normal. So even though they were on pause in 2020 for hiring, they just did not want to lay people off at all because they knew how difficult it was to get those people in the first place, especially at the staff and professional level. And so they held on to their people. There wasn't big layoffs like there was in the 08, 09 recession. And then in 2021, what happened was that we had this service-based businesses saw the easing of restrictions and had adapted. Things started coming back. Everybody's getting positive. Still a lot of frustrations with the variants coming up, but industries that had stayed open with building staff, I started getting a lot of orders at the end of 2020 and in the beginning of 2021. A lot of my peer recruiters started seeing a big uptick in hiring and anticipation for what was to come. Now, companies like coming out of most recessions, they come at it from a really slow pace. It wasn't happening super fast, but it started really picking up during 2020, 2021. And then something happened that nobody expected. Oh, did I go the wrong way here? Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. People didn't see this one coming. What we've referred to as the Great Resignation, I think some other people, in some capacity have termed it maybe a little bit better. Some of it's just a big reshuffle, but people did not expect that there was going to be a very high percentage or a much more statistically significant quit rate out there in the market than anybody ever expected. This has happened across the board in all levels. It's happened very much in the service-based industries. People are trying new different things. I mean, if you're making $15 to $20 an hour, there's other options for you other than that restaurant job you were doing. You could go drive for Uber. You could go do some other home-based business and try to make that up because you've learned to adapt during a pandemic. So we don't know right now what caused all of that. And I think it'll be a fascinating business case in 5 years. But clearly companies are they were starting to hire, and then all of a sudden they don't know where the employees were. And a lot of people chalked it up at first in 2020 and in the beginning of 2021 to different government subsidies, but those have been gone for a long time. So it's not just that. It can't be just that. And so companies are having to get creative with their recruiting efforts. And so let me see here. And so the new environment, pandemic restrictions and mandates that were often very necessary and sometimes later used a little bit as political pawns from both parties, have played a major role in the current environment. Company or government vaccine mandates have led to strong reactions from both current and potential employees. And that's going to be, that's a big, it's an implication for employers as much as it is for candidates. The successful implementation of remote work has also played a major factor in new employment landscape. Companies have implemented or are implementing new policies governing the availability of remote work, and candidates are increasingly using this as a litmus test as to, are they going to move to a new opportunity? I cannot tell you how many times I've had a screening conversation with a candidate saying, I get 2 days flex at this company. I can work from home or work in the office. I'm only mandated to be there 3 days a week. If it doesn't have that, I'm not moving. That's the new reality of and it's a little bit more of, I used to have a recruiter peer hit their company, and they had it right on the front of the website. And it was a arm which tilted towards the employment environment being in the employer's favor, usually in a recessionary time, and in the candidate's favor. And I can guarantee you that needle is way over in the candidate's favor in a lot of situations right now. And that's what it's shifted to on a dime almost.
We do have one question, Mark, to Greg to think about. A question was asked is, thinking about pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic, did the search for A-talent people exclude people over 55? In your opinion?
Did it be pre-pandemic?
Pre and post, did it exclude, maybe it's 2 different answers. Did it exclude people over 55 in the search for A-level talent?
Oh, I've always said this. I've been very consistent about it for all the last 10 to 15 years. There's massive age discrimination out there. I've never shied away from saying that openly. I don't think people do it sometimes over. I don't think they do it consciously sometimes, but I don't think that they really open up to decide what are they really looking for? What problem are they going to try to solve? And, could it be a person that, is maybe been responsible for like larger teams, and maybe they want to downshift and take a step below where they're at? Why aren't they an option? And I never understood why people didn't open it up to it, but there was. I honestly will tell you that there's 2 things happening in that age bracket right now, in the 50s and into the 60s, because people are working so much longer. I think some of those people are just tired of even messing with it, and they are shifting to, I think Joe mentioned earlier, he's doing fractional CFO work. Quite frankly, I think that's awesome. They're not just trying to take temp jobs for Kforce or Robert Half. They're going out and doing higher level professional work on a fractional basis, or they're just opening up their own shingle and doing consulting work. And they're finding that that is a better option than trying to fight this system of people not thinking they have enough gas in the tank.
Have you seen any shift after the pandemic, Greg, or still the same?
Well, and I do think I've seen a little bit of a shift that I think people are definitely more open. And here's where I don't get a full visibility of that, Gary, and to answer that question, is being a boutique executive search firm in a, basically a mid-sized city, metro area like Kansas City. I'm not working with. I do have some client relationship with a company like T-Mobile here in town, but a lot of mine are mid-market companies. And a lot of the positions I'm working with are across the board at lower and upper levels. I mean, I will tell you this, in the middle of the pandemic, in April of the pandemic, I only had one decent search during that time, but it was a regional controller job. I placed somebody that was 61. So it can happen, you know, it's about making sure you find the right person. And I, just like any sort of criteria for discrimination, companies do need to address the policies and procedures that mitigate any sort of discrimination whatsoever. And and by the way, anybody that, whether it's for age discrimination or other reasons, I think that's the one solace I'll give to being in business long enough to where I can be a little bit picky about my clients. If I see any of that, I walk away. I won't support a client like that. Did I answer your question, Gary?
Yeah, it was one in the chat box. I was just passing it on for the group.
So obviously we've had this, so we've got a new environment. We've got a much more robust environment. So it shouldn't be that difficult to find a job. Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends. You really still have to do some work to find the job that you really want. And here's what I want to transition into. I'm oversimplifying this. And by the way, most of everything I'm going to tell you today, you've probably heard before, but I hope that some of it's just a good reminder and some principles that you can take with you. You've got candidates out there, employees out there that are happy at what they're doing. They're not necessarily looking. If I pick up the phone and call somebody, I can tell real quick in a 5-minute conversation that, hey, they've got the job that they want. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a large percentage of people out there that want you to keep them in mind as from my position as a recruiter. They're willing to look, but it's got to be maybe something special. They're not super actively looking. And then you have people that are in various levels of actively looking or in transition. They're either, they've got a situation where the company is going to close in 6 months because they've been purchased, or they're relocating a facility and it's something that you have to be there. It's not something you could do remotely. So you've got people that are at a certain level, and then you've got people that are just caught in transition through no fault of their own. Like I said, I mean, companies get sold on a dime and get collapsed. And so when you look at those three groups, and I want to focus a little bit more on the third group, and we'll address some of the other things in the other groups, but if you're in that third group and you're looking for a job, especially if it's just kind of thrown on you, it kind of goes back to what we talk about as principles in FANG itself, is you really need to always be networking, because you don't know if your company is going to be sold. We have in Kansas City, for those not here in Kansas City, we're the home of Hallmark. And as much as people think that the Hall family is never going to sell Hallmark could be sold next week. We just don't know. And that's just a truth about things, that you just don't know what's going to happen. So you should always be in this mindset that, what would I do tomorrow if I didn't have my job I had today? And what can I do to mitigate some of those things? Now, if you get caught in one of those situations and you haven't done that thing, it goes back to the old adage: when's the best time to plant a tree? 30 years ago. When's the next best time? Today. You've got to go do those steps.
And so I would also always encourage people, as Mark points out, to reach out to your local FING chapter chairs and let them know that you're looking if you're in that group 3, because we get calls all the time in our various markets for people that might be looking for jobs, and it's nice to have a fresh awareness of who's looking and kind of what they're looking for. So don't be shy about doing that either.
Gary, did you peek at my slides?
No. But go ahead, Greg.
Just telling, you're forecasting, you're foreshadowing here. what too many people think a career search looks like. And I would gather if we did have a little bit bigger group here, we'd have a lot of people that would raise their hands on this one, because I know I've probably been guilty of this too early in my career. What you think of a career search as is you put a resume together, you look at the job boards nowadays. Obviously, I'm still from the era that I did get my job at Kforce in the staffing industry through answering an ad in the paper that said tired of accounting. And so I became a recruiter that way. You apply to anything that looks close, especially if you're in that desperate mode because you did no career planning and you all of a sudden are out of a job, and you just apply to anything because you do need a job. I always look at that as, people that are in that mode, I don't begrudge them for doing that too, because they've got a mortgage to pay. They got to keep the lights on. And even if it's not a great job. Now, I'll bring something else up that I think is a better option than that at times. And then they wait to see what happens. And then they complain that no one is calling them to take advantage of their skills. And I will be maybe politically incorrect here. And I think that sometimes we use things like we chalk it up to ageism or discrimination when not enough people know you're available. They're not discriminating against you if they're not even talking to you. And so that would be my only argument, that don't use that as an excuse. It does happen out there. We need to try to do whatever we can as employers to get that to stop from happening. But we need to take full advantage and do things ourselves. So here's the fundamentals that I think that people should follow. Obviously, if you're employed right now, you do this on a continual basis. And then there's some steps in here that, so let me get to my notes on this part. So always be open to opportunity. I always tell people that you may think you have a dream job, but I don't know, there'd be several years ago that if Bill Gates would have called me, or if Elon Musk would call me tomorrow, I'd sure listen, because I think that would be kind of cool. You never know what somebody might be able to offer to you. And so always be open to opportunities. View yourself as a consultant. Some people in this group may have heard this story before, but I was in graduate school at KU, and our professor in our capstone policy class said, hey, when you get out of school, he was from India, I believe. And he said his professor told him, you marry the company and you give them your all, and you stay with them for life. And he looked at us and he said, by the way, don't do that. Don't ever do that. He said, the world has changed. The days that IBM gave people lifetime employment are long gone. That ship sailed 20 years ago. Companies are not super loyal to employees. I think some do a better job than others. But the fact is that we may be a W-2 employee, but you have to be looking at things like what skill sets am I building? What would be the next logical place in my or step in my career? If I'm a 35-year-old corporate controller and I want to become a CFO, and the CFO's 38 in front of me and they aren't going anywhere, I might have to leave this company to become a CFO. You've got to just think of the logical things, evaluating things about, what industry are you in today, and are your skills transferable to another industry? Because you sure don't want to be the last CFO of the typewriter repair industry. So that's just a given. Plan your career as much or more than you plan your vacation. I mean, I know that sounds like a cliche, but the fact is that some people just get comfortable. I'll be honest with you. I was very comfortable. And there's some times in your life that's okay. But I traded, basically some autonomy and flexibility, and just did my job for 15 years while I was an employee at Kforce, but never pushed myself to do something like I'm doing today, which I did in 2010. But just always be reassessing where you're at in your career. Do a regular career assessment. And this is the one that I think has been a big part of my life for the last 2 years, is that making, and I know Mark, you've done some of this too, but if any of you guys, if any of us in this call today, if you had your car break down, especially if it's like paid off and you don't even have a car payment right now, would you even think about it if you'd be grumble and frustrated when the mechanic says the bill's $1,000, but you'd pay it because, hey, I can get 2 more years out of the car, or another year at least. $1,000 is nothing compared to the average, what, $500-600 car payment nowadays. Let me ask you the next question. If you are struggling to write a good resume, why would you struggle for 3 or 4 days to do that when you're not a resume writer, when people will do it for $300 or $400? And that resume is the barrier from you getting out there and looking for a new job. So sometimes you do need to invest in your career, and that goes to maybe even hiring a career coach. I mean, I'm happy to say that because I'm not a career coach, so I'm not trying to sell anybody services, but I do believe that sometimes that we do need to look at where we invest our money. Most of us all spent thousands of dollars on a college education, and then we expect to just know what to do all the time. Sometimes somebody can open our eyes to different possibilities there. So there's definitely resources out there that I strongly consider people evaluating and, investing. Get the references, do your due diligence. And quite honestly, there's a lot of things that you can do, even investing your own time to go research this and go find some good books and advice. I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that's free online. Some of it's better than others. But you can find some of that, some great advice online. So here's the thing. I'm going to shift to, I keep hitting the wrong direction. My apologies. Maybe I got it right there. So here's the steps for a job search today. And this is when I talked about at the beginning of bringing this back to, we've got all this chaos in the world. We've got flex work schedules that are possibilities. There's the idea that, hey, somebody might pick up the phone if I put a resume out there in a database or even go apply to something and it's a remote job. They might pick us up and I can work in Kansas City for a job that's in Chicago or vice versa. I think that's incredible. But I think that the first thing that you need to do is go back to what I just talked about, a career assessment. Make sure you know what's important to you, your family, and everybody that's important to you. And make sure that you know what you're looking for so that you don't get into this mode where we go back to that list of just applying to everything. Make sure that things are congruent with what you're looking for. And that's why that career assessment is so critical. The next step is make sure that you're writing a search plan out. And here's the aspects of a search plan that I think is important for somebody that's actively looking for a job or even just starting that process. Build a list of the industries that you feel like you are qualified to work in. I mean, accounting, finance is a great field in the sense that it crosses a lot of industries. But I can just be upfront with you that a person that's been a 20-year to 25-year manufacturing controller or CFO is probably going to be pretty low on the list for a healthcare organization. So to me, that's the obvious thing. That this is what I don't get is when I get a resume from a manufacturing person for 15 years and I'm advertising a healthcare job, that's where it's not even worth that 2 minutes that they took to read much of the ad, because it doesn't make sense most of the time. Maybe you can get referred into something like that, but I think you can put your efforts into more logical things. Also, build a list of companies that you admire or you think highly of. Maybe you have friends that work at those companies. Then take that next step and do a little bit of homework, do a little bit of research. We've never lived in an age where you can find the people that are hiring for these positions, find their names, find where they're at, because whether it's LinkedIn or other resources through basically databases that are even available through your public library, you can find the names that are the leaders and the C-suite people that are hiring, or that even going through HR and finding the VP or the VP or the director of HR. So many people think that they're bothering these people. Let me dispel a myth. I've been going through a class that talks a lot about limiting beliefs, and I'm not going to go into that today, but I'll tell you this. I think a lot of what we think about a job search and we're worried about bothering people, that is called a limiting belief. Because if you happen to reach out to somebody and your skill set can solve their problem, I can guarantee you they'd much rather you reach out to them and solve their problem if you've got the right resume than them having to sort through 20 to 40 to 50 resumes online of 80% of people that don't have anything close to what they're looking for. So they'll be happy to hear from you if you are a potential fit for their organization. So reaching out directly to people is absolutely a great strategy. And you don't have to do it. And the way that I always phrase it to people when I'm coaching them on this process is you don't have to, and you shouldn't always just pick up the phone and say, by the way, hey, I'm Joe, I'm unemployed, and do you have a job for me? I know that that's very incongruent. I know that that's the awkward thing. What you can do though is reach out to somebody. I always tell people, here's a very tactical approach to something with LinkedIn. You build your list of people that you want to connect with because you either like their company or you want to find out if there might be something there at some point in time. So let's just say you have a list of 10 people. Send them all a very personalized, brief but personalized, it's limited on LinkedIn anyway, invite to LinkedIn. Great. You probably get 50 to 60% acceptance rate, 40 at worst. So 4 out of 10 people will accept your invite. Respond to them with a nice, hey, thanks for connecting. Please let me know if I can ever do anything for you. Stop. Then 2 days later, either through their email, because you probably have their email now off of LinkedIn, or back through LinkedIn, say, hey, thanks again for connecting with me on LinkedIn. Hey, I'm in the middle of investigating a career search, and 5 to 10 minutes of your time would be greatly valuable to me. When would you be able to connect on the phone? And so that's just a practical way to get out of this mode of waiting for the jobs to come and show up on a job board. Put yourself out there. The next area, this is where Gary stole all my thunder. Look to professional organizations, industry organizations that you can become a part of, like Fang, to find out what resources they have available and where they may be able to help you gain exposure. And then the next one is that this can get very daunting when you're doing all of this and keeping track of it. You definitely, for anybody that's spreadsheet jockeys, you can just do it on a spreadsheet. But you do want to track what you're reaching, who you're reaching out to, when you reach out to them, what did you do? You can just do it on a spreadsheet. Honestly, I'm trying to think of the name of it. I do not use it personally, but there's a ton of contact management softwares that like have free versions that allow you up to like 100 contacts or 200 contacts. You could use one of the free versions of a contact management software, or going back to the fact that your career is worth a lot. Heck, if you have to pay 40, 50 bucks a month for something while you're on your job search, get a contact management software and use it, do a job search like you would do any project you would do at work, and do it to the best of your ability. So those are the and then the last one that I put down here, we're all beat over the head with it, but you do constantly need to be networking. You just do. And another comment there too is make sure that when you do reach out to people, if you're on an active job search, or even if you're just trying to set the seeds for the future, do it with the intent of saying, hey, I could use your help on something, but I do want to know something first. What could I do for you? Is there anybody I could help you introduce you to that's in my network? Because if you can make that a little bit more of a quid pro quo, it takes the edge off you that you're asking a favor with no opportunity to give. So that's another thing that I would greatly advise you to do. So in wrapping up here, basically, let me see, how did I I wanted to point out something about flexible work arrangements since it's such a hot topic right now. I think the jury's still out on how these are all going to work out. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had. It's like the world is bipolar right now. I've got hiring managers that are, any age, they could be in their 30s, they could be in their 40s, they could be in their 50s or 60s. Some of them love work from home. They love the flexibility. They love guiding their team. And quite frankly, let's take a step back here. Work from home and remote work arrangements are not new. Did not come up about COVID. It's been around. It just got exploded during COVID, and it just got exposed to being good employees they rose to the challenge, is I guess what I'd say. They rose to the challenge. What I think that a lot of what I got during the pandemic when it was going on, and about a year later, after we've been in it to about a full year, almost to a person, I would ask people how it went. And this is talking to a lot of CFOs, and they would say, it went much better than I expected. Kudos to our IT department. This has been, people stepped up. But one of the things that they would always pause, and then they'd say, but I will say that this was with people I already knew. This is people I had relationships with. And the big concern, and this is what people are going through right now, is that organizations that have any amount of size to them, and they're bringing a class of 20 engineers on a year or 20 accountants on in a year, what happens if they're all never in the office, if they're just remote? And so that's yet to be seen what's going to happen. So my comment on remote work arrangements and you looking at them as a candidate or desiring them, I think they're fantastic. Some stories that I've heard and some opportunities people have had, but I don't think that I don't think that they are a panacea, the work from anywhere environment. Let me give you an example where I would be concerned about something. Let's say you have a specialty skill and somebody's courting you for an opportunity, and you live in Florida and they want you to move to Chicago, and let alone you don't want to go there necessarily because of the cold weather, but it's just not practical because your family situation. And they've got an incredible offer. It's 30% raise, great promotability. And they just said, we really need your skill sets. We're going to even make it to where you can work from Florida. Here's my concern. If you're the one of only a few people that they're making that deal with, where do you think you're going to stand within the whole ranks of the company later if everybody else is just in the office? And so those are the kinds of things that I think people need to really think about when they're changing jobs and they're demanding work from home or work flexibility. Understand that there might be consequences that you can live with, and there might be unintended consequences that you can't. There may be stifling promotions, or you might just say, hey, if I could get that job and work the next 10 years in that role, I'd be cool with it. Then it maybe is a good deal for you. But I just think that there's some things you need to think about. So that is a little bit of bouncing around with some things, but did I hit some points that make sense to you guys, or what questions would you have?
Thank you, Greg. That did make some sense. I enjoyed listening to some of those things. Doing that even from a fractional standpoint, some of those techniques might help if you're looking for opportunities for business.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, you bring up a point, Joe, that it took me a while to clue into this, but honestly, my job as going out and doing the business development side of my job is just like you guys doing anybody doing a job search.
Exactly.
It's the same principles.
Mhm.
It's the same principles.
I agree, Greg. That's good. Joe, thank you for adding that.
Well,
What do you
it's
think,
also-
Victor?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's I think I pretty much everything Greg said makes sense. I think where I'm probably not the only one, but the reaching out part, especially especially to a not so warm contact, a reference. I think that's always been challenging. And for me, sometimes we've been told to network with people in general, not necessarily in your field. I know the FANG is a little more specialized because people tend to be in the finance industry, but we've been into network groups where you could be networking and with your neighbors or with your somebody who's from a totally different for industry, and that's where actually I felt I've had more challenge down in Florida, in my line of work, obviously a lot of people are moving down, but I at least in-person network pre-COVID, it was pretty challenging because I didn't really see that many people or in my sort of specific sort of the sort of the investment management asset management industry. So I'm sort of curious about what Greg thinks about that. I mean obviously asking about your people who you're very close with for their reference and somebody they think that would help your search from your network. I mean that absolutely makes sense. But I'm just curious what you think like outside of that.
I think what you're alluding to, Victor, if I'm picking up on it, is you're talking about a predisposition. Some people are obviously more introverted than extroverted.
Yeah.
And you're not, I get that. I'm obviously a fairly extroverted person, so this does fit me and I can go through it, but I'm not going to lie to you. I've had that phobia of calling that CEO that I want a CFO search before. So we all have it to a certain degree.
Right.
But I think that you start inside out to practice and warm it up. I've got it on the shelf over here, but with my background, I could bring the book over, but you wouldn't be able to probably see it. But there's a book that is called, now I'm going to blank on it. I might have to grab it. Bear with me. We're gonna look for a book. See if I can put it up against my shirt. The Power of Who.
Oh, you gave me that book. It's a great book.
Yeah. It's by Bob Beaudine. And Bob Beaudine did some other sales stuff in his career. And then his dad did own an executive search firm and he joined it and they were doing general stuff. And he ended up, his passion was to get into doing recruiting for sports figures. And in the book, you find out that he actually was the person that stole Danny Manning from the KU Jayhawks, my Jayhawks, and put him at Tulsa down there. And by the way, for the record, I am connected to Danny Manning on LinkedIn and he reached out to me. That's another story for another day. But I do have that claim. So, but my point is what he brings up in this book, and it's one of the biggest points, is his subtitle to this book is "You already know everyone you need to know," and it's those people that that are in your circle that can help introduce you to that next level.
Right.
And by just practicing that process of reaching out to them, seeing what you can do for them, and asking them a favor, what they can do for you, is that reciprocity. And then generally speaking, that what ask for you is not necessarily a job. It's like, who's the next person I can meet? And I used to talk about this, and I had a situation early in my career, actually what led me into recruiting. And I went through, the company that I worked for was awesome, and they paid for outplacement counseling. I was like in my young 30s, and the guy kept telling me this was in the 90s. This is pre-LinkedIn. This is none of that. He said, if you can get a meeting and get one name out of that meeting, you're still golden because you can keep going. You can just reach out to one more person. So you try to get a few names so that you can keep it going. And so that's all. Did that answer your question, Victor?
Yeah, no.
Yes. Start with people that it's comfortable with to get in the habit of doing it.
Right.
And then it's much easier to do that. And by the way, you can always borrow somebody's name. This is a sales 101 thing, but it works for recruiting, is that if Mark says something about, yeah, somebody over at this company and this company, and I said, can I use your name just to introduce myself? And then you put in an email, Mark Blackton referral. They have no idea why Mark referred you to them. And, you know, if it's in just learning about what's going on in their company, and it's not necessarily selling, if it's not selling them insurance or an auto repair warranty, they're happy to hear from you because they get all the junky ones, and having a business conversation isn't that big a leap. So.
Well, I would just, a slightly different tack, but still on networking. I was just to share a story about, you know, the power of networking, sometimes with intended, you know, benefits. Actually months ago, we were having one of these thing meetings and doing some breakout groups. And one of the participants asked me if there's anybody in town that, you know, I'd like to get to know. I said, well, yeah, you know, well, give me some names. So she gave me a few names. And I didn't know this person, but we, you know, did a connection just to get to know you. I didn't have any agenda. They didn't have any agenda. It was just general networking. He was in the banking industry. I'm not a banker, but as we were talking, and he was sharing, you know, some of the things that was going on in his business, and a couple pieces of business he's lost to a competitive bank. He says, I don't know what those guys do. I said, well, I know somebody over there. They were one of my bankers at one of my companies. I'll introduce you. So I did, just an email introduction. And I saw, you know, I got a LinkedIn thing about, you know, a month ago that the guy I was just having a random conversation with is now working for the guy that I introduced him to. Just wasn't planned. It wasn't about finding a job. It was just karma, or just the connection of, you know, the guy he was talking to had a need that this guy could fill, even though that guy wasn't looking for a job either at the time. But there you go.
Good job. That's right. Well, Greg, you've done a fantastic job, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
And as usual, and I owe you a drink. We get together because first of all, I'm selfish. I want to have a drink with you just to catch up.
I love to get back out.
It'd be great. And then I've said some things. I've put some things in the comments. I don't want anyone to underestimate the value of their network. If you share your network with me, I am amazingly thankful, because without that, I would not have a business. I've just grown that way. And Greg and Gary and Joe are part of my my friendships, and that's what it's all about. So I really appreciate that. And I also want to comment and clarify one thing. If people are listening to this recording, it doesn't matter if you're really looking for a job. If you're thinking about it, if you're willing to listen to it, I really want you to share it with your FANG chairman, because that, I mean, Greg, you can confirm this. Everyone who wants to hire somebody that's already is still working.
It's just that
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. The A players that do know ultimately how to hire, they may start down that path, but they get it. They'll recognize somebody in between a job that fits their job, and they'll hire them just as well, because they'll know that the story works. But they will always drift. It's like that forbidden fruit. Oh, I can't get, oh, they're working. I want that person.
Exactly. So as a FANG member, if you are thinking about or being willing to change, please share with your chairman, because I get calls all the time that I don't share with everyone. But the idea is, who's looking? I'm looking for someone with this specific industry, with this kind of background, and who's still working. And it's huge within this organization. And it does take a level of trust to trust your chairman, Gary, or myself, or whatever wherever you're at, to say this to them and say, look, and you, again, most of the FAG members that are active in Kansas City are my good friends, and they will share that with me. But make that friendship, because this organization is amazing. If you're even thinking about changing jobs, just share that with your with your chairman, because the opportunities are going to be amazing for you.
Yeah. One other quick closing
Sure.
comment with that is, if first off, if you flip this around too, because all of you either consult with owners or hiring managers, or you are hiring managers, the same principles apply the other direction. And right now, if you do want A-level talent, advertising isn't always going to find A-level talent. You really have to go out and be proactive. So it kind of flips around, and the same principles of reaching out to people in your network or LinkedIn apply to hiring managers too. And I'm the first to tell people, I mean, only come to me and hire and pay my fees if you don't have the capacity to do it. I just take it over, and you're using my time. And on the candidate front, if you're that candidate that is either in the between or even actively looking, have the confidence that as long as you're in the target area of your search, yes, you might be, coveted companies here in Kansas City would be like Garmin. A lot of people want to go to work for. Well, don't not look at Garmin right now because you don't think that you would qualify, because they may want somebody with 9 out of 10 criteria, but right now they're going to take 7 because they have to fill the position. And you might be the person that has 7 today. So, because they can't find anybody that has 8 or 9.
Well, I've looked at the last 10 years of job descriptions, and I don't think there's any superheroes out there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I really absolutely appreciate this.